This is Outward. Come on, dude. Yes. Motherfucker. At its core, it's a survival game that's been disguised and marketed as a Souls-like RPG, possibly to its own detriment. This game was developed by 9 Dot Studios, a small indie company based out of Quebec. This game implements mechanics I haven't seen in RPGs before that I think every big developer should look at and implement into their games. It's an extremely punishing yet rewarding game full of exploration, adventure, and lots of running. I mean, a lot of freaking running. And I was about 10 hours deep into this game when I thought to myself, man, this game kinda sucks. Pause. I was wrong. It doesn't suck. But it's extremely rough around the edges and took some serious time to better understand this game. For the first part of the video, I'll probably sound a bit disparaging of the game, but hang with me because overall I would say this game was a very positive experience and totally worth playing. The developers of this game intentionally sacrificed a ton so they could implement what they felt was important, and we'll talk about why they did that later on. Outward was an extremely ambitious game developed by a small team with a small budget, and that is really reflected in some of the main downfalls of this game. So, when you're playing it, it has this strange dichotomy where there are extremely interesting mechanics and systems in this game, but then some extremely basic standards that are expected nowadays are completely absent. There is a large number of positive attributes to be found here though. I'm going to cover a ton about this game, and for the most part cover it in chronological order from when I started playing and what I noticed about the game as I progressed. So, let's start at the beginning. The character creation. Woof. You can be a black guy, a white dude, or an Asian fella. Or lady. Look, killer graphics aren't everything, and it's certainly not what makes a game great, but the people in this game look like absolute dong water. The people and some enemies look pretty rough, but the world itself is actually beautiful, even if it looks a touch outdated. If you told me this game came out in 2008, I'd probably say, it's not too bad. This game came out in 2019. Typically, indie studios lean into a more stylized graphic to make up for the lack of manpower and millions of dollars to make hyper-realistic graphics. And this game isn't really either. It just kind of looks like a game from 2010. And that being said, it does have moments where the music hits right, the sun's creeping through the trees, the grass is flowing, and it's just perfect. After your character is created, the intro of the game starts, which is just a series of images with text laid over top. There are no cutscenes, cinematics, and barely any voice acting in this game. Another reflection of the small budget in studio. I really don't mind the screenshots and text, but even just like hiring a voice actor to narrate the intro could have probably helped set the tone of the story way better. But I'm not even going to go super in depth to the story because frankly, that's like one of the weakest points of this entire game. You are going to play Outward for the gameplay, not for the story. But the player has lived his entire life in the safety of Cirzo, a small coastal village, and we have a blood price upon our head. In this village, punishment is carried out through a family bloodline and not just as an individual. So our character's grandmother committed some type of heinous act, has caused a blood price levied onto our family, so that still to this day we're paying reparations. And in an attempt to pay off the blood price, we set out with our friend Yazan on a seafaring expedition to make some silver. On the return trip home, the boat wrecked and all of the silver we had made sunk to the bottom of the ocean, and we're back at square one. Finally in control of our character, our adventure begins. We wander around the shipwreck and you'll quickly notice that there are no tutorials in this game. The player receives almost no direction about anything, literally at all, which can be confusing at first, but really is kind of a breath of fresh air. Games now have a tendency to spoon-feed the player every drop of information on a game's mechanics to make it as accessible as possible to as large of an audience as they can. Outward takes the total opposite approach. In an interview the studio head did with a YouTuber named Radaskur, he said this game was created for more experienced gamers who have a lot of experience with RPGs. Step aside, kids. This one's for the dads.
God, I just stabbed a parking attendant. Where's the button to turn myself in?
No mechanics are explained. Everything is discovered by trial and error or having a general knowledge of the standard mechanics in an RPG, and more importantly, the standard mechanics in a survival game. I would say one of the faults from a marketing standpoint for this game is that it doesn't really sell how good of a survival game it is. It comes off as a Souls-like indie RPG adventure game. The Souls-like tag drives me nuts. This has become such a catch-all for games, it's almost meaningless now at this point. Can you dodge roll? Souls-like. Are enemies difficult and try to cram it in dry? Souls-like. Is the game extremely vague about literally everything? Souls-like. From a gameplay perspective, Outward actually reminds me a ton of Kingdom Come, one of my all-time favorite games. Just strip away the graphics, the voice acting, the cutscenes, and the incredible story, and run it through a cheese grater, and there you go. You got Outward. This game shares elements with Kingdom Come in that it's a slow-paced, survival-oriented game with really detailed, in-depth mechanics. The player starts out extremely weak. Fighting is difficult because we're untrained. You need to find trainers and good gear to get better. This game is all about picking the right fights and pacing the journey. Instead of a Souls-like, I would call this game a Come-like. So stupid. After resting, we wake up in our family's home, which is the lighthouse of Cierzo. Upon exiting, the player is accosted by a group of townsfolk and guards who are pissed off that we left on our journey for 4 months without paying our blood price, and now we don't have any money to pay. Risa Aberdeen, who is basically the chief, gives us 5 days to come up with 150 silver or they will have to seize our home. And our best way to make this amount of money is to venture outside the city walls into the wilderness. That's about all the instruction you get to start the game. I really enjoyed this open-ended style of starting a game. You're not really pigeonholed into how you should start because no one tells you to do anything. I do understand how this could really turn off inexperienced players who are left sitting like, well, what the hell am I supposed to do now? I don't have a quest marker or instructions on what to do. It's totally left up to the player how they want to start their adventure. The town of Cierzo is beautiful in a unique way and has an awesome atmosphere. That being said, early on walking around the city, I pretty quickly noticed some of the glaring faults of this game. There are no facial animations on any NPCs, so when you talk to them, it kind of has this strange, jarring effect at first. And when you do interact or talk to someone, they basically have partial voice acting. They'll say the first few words of whatever their dialogue box says.
Blessings of Allah upon you.
Which I suppose is a decent way to deal with the lack of voice acting. While I explore the town, there was just something off and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. There are a ton of extremely interesting looking NPCs walking around, and I can't talk to any of them. There are really interesting buildings everywhere scattered around the town, and I can't go into any of them. The town has people walking around everywhere, but it doesn't feel lived in. There's barely any clutter in this game. Barrels, crates, knick-knackery, the items that make a place feel lived in, are kind of non-existent. It's like when you watch a streamer give a house tour of their $1 million mansion and it just has completely blank walls and no furniture and just a gaming PC sitting in the corner. After wandering around the town more, it finally hit me. This game feels like a dead MMO and I'm the only player in the world. The text dialogue with partial voice acting, NPCs everywhere that can't be interacted with, this vast expansive world with different zones to travel between, hotkeys for skills, and races that mean nothing. Pretty quickly, you learn you have to run a lot in this game. There are no mounts, and you can't technically fast travel, but you can kill yourself. A lot of your playtime will be spent roaming the countryside. It can at times get extremely monotonous just running endlessly, especially when you die while trying to get somewhere. However, in the right doses, the ambient of this game when exploring the world is like top tier. The soundtrack of this game slaps. It is so good. When the music is just right, the wind is rustling in the grass and the trees, the sun is cresting over the mountains in the distance, it's incredible. It gives me that same feeling as running around in Cyrodiil and Oblivion when I was a teenager and played that game endlessly. There are quite a few moments where the game gets kind of boring running around. I'm actually one of those dorks who tries to fast travel as little as possible when it comes to playing a game. I think exploring on foot or a mount is the best way to experience a game. There's so much that can be missed on the map when using fast travel that to really have a rich and detailed experience, on foot or hoof is the best way to go. This game could have really benefited by having mounts or maybe even a limited fast travel system that from the main city of each zone, you could have paid for a carriage to take you to the border crossing area between regions. Traveling around in a zone isn't too bad, but when you have to travel between different zones, it's an absolute slog. And I think the main reason for it is because there is very little enemy variation in each zone, and the spawns are very sparse. Pretty quickly too, you realize that enemies spawn in the exact same location as well, so they're really easy to avoid because the AI in this game is not very good. There's also very few in-game assets, so instead of a bunch of beautiful trees, it's the exact 2 or 3 same models copy and pasted across the entirety of a zone. Even in the unique points of interest like the Purple Flux Mountain, all the assets are actually exactly the same, but just color shifted to be purple. There's also no experience levels in this game, so you have to buy new skills from a trainer to get better. So there isn't an incentive really to fight enemies while traveling around the map. In fact, you'd probably want to do the opposite so you don't lose health and stamina when you actually have an important fight. So after a while, I found myself listening to a podcast or watching a YouTube video on my other monitor while running between locations and evading enemies. Which, look, it's not terrible depending on how you look at it. There are times when I really do enjoy a game that I can kind of mindlessly play while watching or listening to something else, and this game weirdly fits the bill. There's almost no dialogue, so you won't ever miss something important someone said, and it's easy to focus up for a few minutes while you fight some enemies and then go back to running around while you watch YouTube. Which may sound like a negative quality, but there's definitely a time and place for a game that's the secondary focus. While a bulk of this game feels like it can be played while barely paying attention, the moments that you need to focus up feel like they require 150% of your focus. Combat in this game is tough. Enemies can kill you in 2 to 3 hits. The combat system at first seems really intense and very Souls-like, but after a while, I realize it's a bit janky. I mentioned earlier Kingdom Come, and the combat system reminds me of it in a way. You have to manage your stamina effectively. Enemies have block indicators and will attempt to dodge attacks. But with Kingdom Come, as the game progressed and your understanding of the combat system evolved, so does your enjoyment of fighting. It feels like you're becoming a more skilled fighter. And outward, it just feels like you're better understanding how to abuse the combat system than necessarily getting better at it. When you hit someone, it staggers them, so if you dodge their attack and make sure you land the first hit, you can basically just start wailing on them until they die. On the other hand, if multiple enemies attack you or land a strong hit on you first, it's super easy for you to get killed for the exact same reason. Well, killed is a relative term. One of the cooler aspects of this game is your player doesn't technically ever die and you won't reload. Instead, there are randomized death scenarios. And outward, you can only save upon exiting the game, so there isn't any reloading. So for all those people who hated Kingdom Come's save system, you're really going to love this. I thought this was such a clever mechanic, and I would love to see this implemented into other games. So, how it works: when you die, a random scenario occurs. It could be you were brought back to town by a guard passing by, or Jep the homie found you lying dead and set up a fire and left you a potion for you to recover. Or maybe a friendly Immaculate, which is a type of scourge, decides to rescue you. The really interesting ones, in my opinion, are when you die to bandits or troglodytes. Very often you'll be taken prisoner into their base or cave. I absolutely love this system. Though, the death scenarios can be slightly abused to basically fast travel around the map because you don't lose any of your items when you die. So you could just get killed over and over again and hope that you wake up back in the city, or at least closer to the city than you're currently in. The inventory system in this game is awesome, and the way they did it would benefit so many other RPGs. The player has a very small and maybe realistic carrying capacity. So a backpack is necessary. And there are a different variety of backpacks in this game, some that are meant for stealth and speed, and others that are meant for loot goblins. Even with a giant backpack, your carrying capacity isn't enormous, so the loot that you do find in this game is important because you actually have to make decisions about what is worth taking and what's not, instead of just vacuuming up every piece of crap you discover along the way. I would love to see backpack mechanics like this implemented into more games, where your carrying capacity is a part of your character's build. Certain backpacks have the ability to have a lantern hung on them so you can have a light source and use both hands, and fairly often this is a must because caves and nighttime are actually dark in this game and is awesome. It makes going into caves 10 times scarier when they are seriously dark and spooky. Also, you can drop and pick up your backpack with the press of a key, so you can move more quickly while fighting and make your dodge rolls more effective. Because when you wear a backpack, it actually affects your ability to dodge, and the items inside your backpack will get damaged by rolling with your pack on too much. Did I mention you can only dodge roll? Your character is incapable of jumping in this game, which drives me freaking insane. It just feels wrong not being able to jump in a game. In the majority of the game, it's not a problem because it was designed without the ability to jump in mind. However, there are moments when I'm like standing next to a tiny lip and I have to walk all the way around to get to a staircase to get up a 6-inch platform. The game is billed as an open world RPG, which it is, but truthfully the biggest aspect of this game is the survival mechanics. It has a detailed crafting system from weapons, alchemy, food, drinks, and a variety of different traps. You have to actively manage stamina, health, and mana. The game has an awesome mechanic where as you travel and adventure across the vast land, your resources like stamina, health, and mana become burnt. The longer you go without rest, the smaller your max of that resource becomes. So, sleeping either in an inn or in a tent can help cure that, but if you're out in the wild and you sleep in a tent, there's a chance that you could be ambushed while sleeping, so you have to balance being on guard and sleeping to get through the night unperturbed. Little camping hot tip for you that isn't explained in the game, and I only know this from watching a YouTube video about it, is that when you see butterflies floating around in the wild in an area, it means that area is safe and you can't be ambushed. While at camp, you can light up a fire, cook some different meals and food, which all have recipes that can be learned. Over the fire, you can cook simple meals, but if you want the good stuff, you gotta throw down the pot. But don't set your tent too close to the fire because temperature management is another big aspect of this game. Your player can get hot or cold and they can get ill, which is a huge pain in the neck because it causes a bunch of different debuffs. To cure your debuffs, you'll need to drink teas and potions, which can be bought or crafted. On top of all the food stuff, there's also a large amount of weapon crafting, but truthfully, I don't find it that interesting. You essentially just attach animal parts onto a pre-existing weapon to make it do more damage. Magic is one of the best aspects of this game, and I haven't even talked about it at all, and that's because it confuses the hell out of me. Outward may legitimately have one of the best magic systems in any game. It is so detailed and intricate and full of variation, it's crazy. It feels like real powerful magic. It has weight and gravity to it. In this game, the character doesn't even start with a mana bar. It has to be unlocked, which makes total sense. In so many games that have magic systems, every single Dick and Harry knows how to cast the base spells well. So is it really that magical if everybody knows it? But in Outward, you have to travel to the Conflux Mountain and enter the Ley Line, which is a powerful source of magic. Inside the Conflux Chamber, you have to sacrifice 5 health and stamina for every 20 mana you wish to gain. I love this. Magic in this game is crazy strong, but it's complicated, a bit slow, and makes you physically weaker. It creates an awesome balancing act for trying to become this overpowered spell slinger. Many of the spells and abilities can be chained off one another to increase their power or even change their effect, and I won't speak a ton on the magic because I'm pretty inexperienced with the system, but there are videos that really go into the details of the magic if you want to learn more about it, but it is an incredible system. I'm not really sure how to put this eloquently, but this game excels at making you feel different emotions while playing it, which is really impressive for a game with a very weak narrative and barely any dialogue to persuade your emotions. When I finally defeated an Immaculate for the first time, I was pumped. The progress from struggling to defeat the routine bandit to now dueling extremely powerful enemies is so rewarding. On the flip side of that, the times where I still managed to get killed by bandits while super geared, I would get so frustrated I would literally just turn off the game. There are times when exploring new areas I felt adventurous and hopeful. Then fairly often while traveling across the world, I felt like really lonely. It was a bizarre feeling. The sparse enemies, no companions or mounts in this game, a giant expansive world between cities. It felt lonely, and in a good way, and it felt like I was immersed in the game. I mentioned earlier in the video that the developers sacrificed a lot when it came to this game, and I wanted to kind of quickly elaborate on why. When they set out to make this game, one of their largest priorities was to make a game without developer crunch. They wanted to prove they could create a game without having to work 16-hour days for months on end and make their lives miserable. Then, one of the biggest features of the game is co-op. They needed to be able to create online play as well as local split screen, so a lot of their time and resources that would have gone to small quality of life tweaks kind of went out the window because everything was devoted into making this game compatible for split screen and co-op, also in doing it in respects to the developer's time. Outward is a game that grows on you. I don't think it puts a very good first foot forward, and it takes a considerable amount of time to start enjoying the game. The weak narrative, complex gameplay, and no instructions can lead to a pretty wobbly start. Because of those things, once I started to understand more, it was so rewarding. This game is sincerely itself. It's not a whimsical Souls-like, and if this game had a AAA budget, it probably would have been heralded as a groundbreaking, innovative masterpiece, which I really think this game is groundbreaking in a lot of ways. I would implore you to even just cruise around the game's wiki and read about the details and intricacies of mechanics. It'll blow your mind. Outward does have some weak spots and boring moments that'll turn away some players, but for the right audience, this game is incredible. Is it the greatest game I've ever played? Certainly not, but it's a diamond in the rough. I'm not sure what 9 Dot Studios is up to next, but if they polish up what was in this game and implement it into their next project, I wouldn't want to miss it.